Factory Farming and the Human Illness by Marissa Klemek. There are many conditions that exist in factory farming that not only affect the animal but the human population as well. Since we rely on these animals as our food source, their living conditions and health affect the quality of our food. Two direct results of these conditions are foodborne illnesses and disease. There are three main reasons why the quality of our food becomes questionable: overpopulation, inadequate diet, and abuse. Overpopulation is the biggest factor in how disease is spread, since the living conditions of these factory farmed animals are extremely overcrowded and unsanitary. Since the sole purpose of factory farming is for production, factory farms house as many animals as they can in such confined living quarters. These factory farm animals are refused the right to ventilation, sunlight, and fresh air. This, in turn, makes it easier for bacteria and illness to be spread among the animals. Since there are so many animals in such a small area, the aspect of factory farming is, as the amount of animals increase, the space that they occupy remains the same. The second factor that is responsible for the health and well-being of our food is inadequate diets. The diet of a factory farmed animal is that of antibiotics and hormones. Hormones are used to stimulate growth within the animals at a faster rate, and the antibiotics are to prevent these animals from getting sick before they actually do. According to Freuer with CNN, he states that on a typical factory farm, drugs are fed to animals with every meal. The animals have been bred to such extremes that sickness is inevitable, and the living conditions promote illness. What factory farms are trying to do is to keep their animals as healthy as they can in such extremely overcrowded and deplorable living conditions. They substitute a natural diet for resistance. The last factor which contributes to the spread of disease is abuse. Besides the physical abuse that these animals face, such as debeaking, docking of tails, kicking, and torture, these animals are subjected to mental abuse as well. Because animals are extremely intelligent creatures, confinement and overcrowdedness results in stress on their body. Like humans, when animals are experiencing stress, their immune system becomes weakened, which in turn makes them more vulnerable to disease and bacteria. If we take a look at how factory farming produces our meat, we can see that there are more negative aspects than there are good. Since these animals are not necessarily healthy when they're slaughtered, we can understand why humans are becoming sick from consuming them. As stated by Barbara Minton with the Natural News, she says there is clearly a link between factory farming and the human illness. As of today, there are more diseases that are directly linked to factory farming. The four most popular, or the four most known to us at this time, are the swine flu, mad cow, bird flu, and MRSA. These are the current diseases and illnesses that are affecting the human population and which are life-threatening among us. When these animals are being fed these antibiotics to prevent illness, they're actually building a resistance to what they're being given. And with the strains of viruses or bacteria that these animals carry, when they're unable to transfer themselves within their own species, they begin to mutate and then transfer to a different species. Right now, the best term to describe it is when an animal has bacteria that cannot be transferred to another animal and in turn can be transferred and mutated to a human, it becomes a zoonotic virus or disease. According to Barbara Minton with the Natural News, she says that the excessive use of antibiotics in factory farms can select for resistant bacteria such as MRSA. When we look back on MRSA, which also is known as staph infection, it is originating from the pig. So now we can see that sicknesses that once affected animals are now affecting the human population due to mutation. These bacteria are spread through our natural surroundings, either through the air, water, or other environmental resources. As quoted by As quoted by Laura Sayer with Mother Earth News, she states, quote, that the biggest transmission route is waste. Confined livestock operations in the United States produce 3 times as much waste each year as the country's entire human population. Through animal waste, these pathogens are able to pass themselves on. Working with the environment, pathogens well, basically, because there is an excess of manure, these pathogens cannot be neutralized with the environmental surroundings, which in turn causes an excess of these. When the environment cannot work with these pathogens to create a neutral balance between the two, we have excess, which then transfers itself through our natural resources. Although there are more negative aspects than there are good, there are 2 aspects that I can point out which are beneficial about factory farming. Yes, factory farms are responsible for a very high demand of meat production worldwide. If we did not rely on factory farming, the cost of meat would be extremely expensive. Factory farming has basically made an equilibrium between the economy and the consumer, making it easier, or should I say economical, for us to purchase meat. That if factory farming didn't exist, meat would be expensive, and we as individuals wouldn't be able to afford it. The second aspect that we need to take into consideration about factory farming is that factory farming is not the sole reason why there's a transfer of disease from animals to humans. We began to domesticate these animals years ago, and from there, animals carry a bacteria that humans do not. With the growth and the animal-to-human handling, we have either been able to build an immunity, or we were able to get vaccinated. So there are different strains of bacteria that animals carry which can be transferred to humans. But at this point in time, the main way that these viruses are now affecting humans, or diseases or illness are now affecting humans, is through contaminated meat. So in one last quote by Laura Sayer with the Mother Earth News, regarding domestication of animals, she states that most of these ailments probably appeared relatively early in the 10,000-year-old history of domestication. So we cannot blame factory farming as a complete reason on why us humans are becoming sick from consuming this meat. Basically, that if factory farming didn't have such an impact on its environment through its waste and its animal abuse and its overcrowdedness and unsanitary living conditions, our food may be a little bit safer. But factory farm animals, if they weren't living in such deplorable living conditions and subjected to improper diets and just unnatural living conditions, we may be able to look at our food as a little bit more than just what's feeding our family, so to say. This is food that we consume on an everyday basis. So if we were able to clean up the factory farming aspect, no pun intended, to clean them up, we very well may be able to eliminate half the diseases that are being spread between the animal to human contact or the animal to human consumption. So basically, we need to work on eliminating the diseases that these animals are giving us due to their living conditions, because if we continue to have these animals forced to be in these lifestyles, we are going to subject ourselves to more diseases and viruses that don't have cures and will become more life-threatening among the human population. And I don't think that we should be getting sick by the food that we eat.